Welcome to Parallax.
Welcome to the Parallax podcast. My name is Tom Amarque. With me today is Dr. Marc Gafni. Marc, a very welcome to you that you took the time and talk a little bit about the unique self and will and
all of it. No,
welcome.
delighted to be with you, Tom. And actually, I remember our last podcast on war was a very, very actually important podcast that I got a lot of feedback about. We didn't yet stop war, but it was a step in the right direction.
Yes. And so one of the points why we're doing this is because the German edition of your book Unique Self is out now in Germany.
Yes.
And this is fantastic. Congratulations. So no, but the book, the English original, is I guess 7-8 years old, or is it even older, 10 years?
Yeah, no, it was published. The original version was published in 2011.
Right.
2011. We're working now on volume 2.
Right.
Which is the second volume, but because what a lot's happened between 2011, but the book stands. I mean, it stands strongly.
Yeah. And I hope to delve into the new stuff a little bit at the later part of the podcast, but to just bring it up to speed for everybody who isn't familiar with your idea of the self and especially the unique self.
Sure. I mean, the simplest way to dive in is, if we can enter really through the door of enlightenment, which is actually a good door to enter. So the Western Enlightenment, when we talk about the Western Enlightenment that you and I, one way or the other, were raised on, the Western Enlightenment says the goal is to be a healthy separate self. And in fact, the problem was being part of some larger identity, right, which defines you in the medieval period, whether religiously or politically. Step out of that, and both human dignity and our capacity to heal suffering lives in the separate self. And we're saying this now even more clearly than it's in the book because it crystallized afterwards, although this is throughout the book. This is a theme that goes throughout the book. The same term enlightenment is used in mystical texts, both West and East, but let's call it for the time being Eastern Enlightenment. So Eastern Enlightenment says, in order to achieve human dignity and to heal suffering, you have to move beyond separate self, because separate self is not the solution, it's the problem. So now we have two visions of enlightenment. One which says separate self is the goal, the telos, and the other one says separate self is the disease. That's a quite large clash which actually lives in our bodies. And at some point I had this realization that grew over 30 years, of just practicing, when we say practice, we practice and we teach, and then we practice, and then we're crushed by life, and we're ecstatic, and then we're reading all the time, we're surrounded in it so all of that together, at some point I realized that there was a fundamental flaw in Enlightenment teaching, right? And I found it, not only in many conversations, but and I was going to put out a book itself, a scholarly book of just citations of where this mistake appears, but it appears across mystical texts. And it's a failure to disambiguate or to distinguish between separateness and uniqueness. So in the West, the thought is, oh, you're going to get beyond suffering by being a separate self. That's the location of human dignity. We've got to stay there. That's actually not true. I actually can move beyond separate self. I can realize what we might call my true self. So my true self is my sense of being one with the field. And I don't want to talk about more of what the field is, but for now we'll call it the field of consciousness, but that's insufficient. We'll get to that later. It's really the field of consciousness, Eros, and desire. It's really the field of throbbing value in consciousness. It's much more than the field of awareness, which is one of the mistakes in classical Enlightenment teaching. But said simply, I move beyond my separate self, which is my skin-encapsulated ego. I realize I'm a true self. So Western Enlightenment says, that's where the problem is, Mark. You get lost in that. You have no identity, right? You're part of the whole, but you don't stop there. You then move from the impersonal of true self to a higher individuation, which is the irreducible uniqueness of true self incarnate in me, as me, and through me. And that is actually my unique will. My unique will is the irreducible unique expression of love, beauty, love, intelligence, and love will that lives in me, as me, and through me, that never was, is, or will be ever again, that discloses itself through my unique self. So my dignity is not in my separate self, which is what the West thought. It's in my unique self. The failure to disambiguate separateness and uniqueness, so the West said, no, I've got to hold on to separate self, because the alternative is this true self where I get lost, either an Eastern true self or a true self of kind of the process or the state, right? In other words, process philosophy, and particularly kind of notions of a kind of I'm part of the state, I'm part of the dialectic of history that's moving through me, I'm part of this Hegelian kind of process, right? But I'm not individuated fully, is another version of true self. There's a true self which is kind of being, and there's a true self which is the oppression of the state that views itself as the impulse process. And both of them, the individual gets lost. So no, beyond that, there's unique self. Oh, so my dignity is not in true self by itself, but it's not in separate self. It's my individuated unique self. And in the East, the thinking was, oh, we've got to move beyond separate self to heal suffering. So therefore, we're going to realize our true identity in the field of being, in the field of awareness, in the field of consciousness. That must be true. Separate self is the source of suffering. We got to get rid of separateness. But in 1,000 Eastern texts, they'll say, you've got to get rid of separateness, uniqueness. They'll literally use the words together again and again. But that's not true. I can actually become true self and then realize that my true self individuates as Tomness, which is, reality having a Tom experience. And I remember once talking to Jumpo Roshi. I don't know if you ever met Jumpo before he passed. He's a wonderful man, wild man, wild life, wild story. He wrote a wild, I can say he had a wild story because he wrote it, an autobiography. So he told all the stories, but just a completely wild life.
I actually met him once in Mallorca, for all places.
Oh, did you really? Right.
Yeah, I did.
At a club? Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah, no. Jumpo is a wild man. He's a beautiful man. And so he kind of challenged, as many of the kind of early, Ken and I had, Ken Wilber, years of arguments about it. And, Genpo Roshi, kind of fought with me about it until Genpo adopted unique self in his book. He kind of got it. But the Jumpo, that happened with many, many teachers. We would have I clashed with people about it for about a decade, where everyone assumed it must be a fancy way of saying ego self or separate self, until, the realization began to penetrate. No, it's something else. This is actually Enlightenment realization. But the best and most wonderful story, he was wonderful, and I think we have this online on the Unique Self Institute site, is we agreed to do a dialogue, and he was going to kind of decimate kind of unique self and show why it's obviously separate self, et cetera, et cetera. So I said to him, I have one, direct transmission of unique self, and it's 2 words, and you will get it immediately, and you'll never question it again. And we kind of built it up, and we're kind of laughing. It's okay. All right, give it to me. Give it to me. So I said, Jumpo Roshi. He said, I get it. I was like, oh, right. In other words, Jumpo Roshi, that beingness is not just a separate self, right? And it's not merely true self. It's this irreducible, unique expression of love intelligence and love beauty and love will that is a unique expression of the field and not separate from the field, right? It is to be the cosmoerotic universe in person as Jumper Roshi. And it was like, boom, right? Like, okay, right? It's like, it was a very beautiful moment for both of us, right? Kind of in the kind of, and really what's happened is I'm gratified in one sense in which, since we started this conversation, I remember I had some version of this conversation with Thomas Hubel, who I believe is in Germany, back in 2009 or 10, with dozens and dozens of teachers where there's always the same response. And at some point it's not that I want to be clear. It's not that I persuaded anyone. Not at all. It's a realization. It's not a persuasion. It's not a kind of conceptual. It's the same way you can't persuade anyone about true self. And it's a direct realization. And paradoxically, significant teachers without that realization were often caught and torn apart because they felt themselves driven to create, to manifest, to accomplish, etc. They didn't quite know what to do with that drive. Kind of hard to explain in terms of true self. So what their secret belief was always some version of, I'm telling everyone I'm in this enlightened, true self state, but really I got this raging egoic stuff going on in me, which actually causes them many, many people, men and women. I mean, literally, Tom, dozens of conversations over a decade, that cause them enormous shame. But when you actually then realize, no, you can disambiguate between separate ego self, and it's actually the drive, right? The creative advance of cosmos through you. Through uniqueness, it changes everything. And of course, Zach Stein and I have taken more steps in this direction in multiple ways. We have a book that's been in progress for years called A Unique Voice, where we're merging developmental thought and unique self, right, to kind of see how those work together. So that's a whole play. But one of the things we've already done in cosmoerotic humanism, this new story of value, which appears in First Principles and First Values, is to establish a set of first principles and first values of cosmos that all evolve. They're eternal values, meaning they're the ground of cosmos, eternal not in the sense of unchanging or everlasting, but that which is beneath time and beneath space, so they're eternal, and yet evolving, and one of them is uniqueness. And so uniqueness is actually a first principle and first value of cosmos, which goes all the way down the evolutionary chain. And this is not in the Unique Self book because I wasn't thinking in those terms then. And actually uniqueness probably starts with the first pressure waves, right? I've done a number of dialogues with my dear friend and very good scientist, Howard Bloom, on this topic. We've tried to trace uniqueness all the way down. And I have a 30,000 word essay, which is about to be published on the history of uniqueness, right, in cosmos, right? And so when uniqueness appears as unique self, it's not a sudden, apparition. It is the evolution of the value of uniqueness, the first principle and the first value of uniqueness, all the way up and all the way down the evolutionary chain. And of course, maybe last sentence, and then back to you. And thank you for giving me the space to kind of just at least begin to share a little bit. You can't love without uniqueness, right? In other words, love at its core, or Eros, the Eros of cosmos, which when it appears at the human level, we call it love. At earlier levels, let's say at the subatomic level, we might call it attraction and repulsion, or what I would call more accurately, allurement and autonomy. But allurement is I'm allured to, right? Oh, wow, I'm excited to talk to Tom today. But Tom is not a function, right? It's not a mechanical, like, oh, I want to have no, I'm going to talk to Tomness, right? It's like there's a quality, right. And that quality is utterly unique, and the space between is unique. And so love at its core is not a feeling, although, right, there's a matrix of feeling, but love at its core, which undergirds the feeling, love is a perception, right? I'm seeing. So to say I love you is to say I see you, but what do I see? It's not that I see your talents or oh good black kind of clothes or right kind of no, I see your unique self. Love is a unique self perception, and self love is a perception of my own unique self, right? So you can't even begin to talk about love in any way without unique self. All intimacy is unique. That's its nature. There is no generic intimacy. Generic intimacy is called fascism. There's a name for that, right? Or totalitarianism. That's generic intimacy, right?
Right.
So it's just without the structure of unique self, you really can't begin to actually address who am I in any way that works. In which case you're in fundamental contortion and therefore unimaginable pain about your own identity, right? Either you're lost in separate self, and the experience of separate self is like being a puzzle piece that's looking for a larger puzzle, but it doesn't exist. So it's kind of stumbling around the puzzle piece, and it can't quite get there. But to be true self is to be like the whole puzzle as a one, and then you tell your meditation teacher, but there's these lines separating the puzzle pieces, and your meditation teacher says, "Die on the cushion." Right? It's like, like, what do you do? Meditate more. But you're like, no, 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 no. Right? It's like, so that's true self. It's only unique self when you actually have an experience that I'm an irreducible, unique expression of all that is. I'm a puzzle piece, and my puzzle piece actually fits precisely. It's stunning into this piece of the puzzle. So in all my idiosyncrasies, when I clarify them, they fit precisely. And therefore, not only am I completing the puzzle, I'm held by the puzzle. Right? It's very beautiful. It's like, oh. And then finally I get to evolutionary unique self, which means I'm not just completing the puzzle, I'm evolving the puzzle. I'm making the puzzle more. It's like, oh, and there's a sense, and that's not just a conceptual difference, it's a difference in the sense of power that moves through me. And we've split up our relationship to power and interrogated in kind of either totalitarian or neoliberal terms, right? And in social context, we've identified power with abuse. If you say the word power, there must be abuse, which is, of course, preposterous, right? And then power itself is located in many, many overt and hidden ways. So that's right? But power is the elixir of reality. Reality is filled with power, and evolution is this inexorable power. So in other words, the experience of evolutionary unique self is not just, let's put unique self and evolution together. It's unique self in an evolutionary context. I mean, that's true conceptually, but there's a sense of the enormous power moving through you, right? And it's the power to impact. And there's a pleasure in the power to impact that we've actually exiled and split off. And then it's taken up by the likes of Sauron, right? Because it's only when Gandalf the Grey becomes Gandalf the White, right? In Lord of the Rings, for those of you familiar with Lord of the Rings, that you see, now there's an antidote. Now there's a response to Sauron, right? Because Gandalf has taken power in an entirely different way. And so evolutionary unique self is the experience that I have a unique self. I'm a puzzle piece that I don't just complete the puzzle, I evolve the puzzle. And then number 5, and now I can play my instrument in the unique self symphony. And now there's unique self symphony. And unique self symphony is the image we use in unique self, which I believe doesn't even appear in the unique self book, right? It's a later, but that's a sense of the map. Thank you so we could just unpack it a little bit and for your patience.
Sure, no problem. So I wonder, since the 70s, there was, the wrestling with the terminology of the self, right? And you had like John C. Lilly and the deep self, and you had the true self, and you had the higher self, and we have the separate self, the unique self. So, but this terminology, the self, that kind of alludes to the fact that it is something with certain boundaries, but that what you're describing does not necessarily have boundaries. So how do you think about the self, like across the board? Like,
Beautiful. It's a beautiful question.
you know what I'm saying? Because like,
And
what
it's
is,
beautiful. Yeah, please, please.
because with using the word self, you imply a
A
whole, a unit.
reified thing.
Yeah, a unity,
Yeah.
right? With a membrane, let's say.
Right. There's so many ways to. There's so many dimensions of that inquiry. It's such an important inquiry, but let's take it slow because it's insanely important. So, and sometimes resorting to language is helpful because there are two fundamental codes in reality, and the intelligent design people are wrong about a bunch of things, for sure, kind of in the evolutionary conversation. But one of the things that no one's quite prepared to say out loud is that as I've read them over recent years, I realize just how much they've been caricatured, right? And there's much more valence in the different levels, and there's some very good writers, right, and scientists in that world who get caricatured by the neoliberal kind of neo-Darwinian world, who actually don't say the things that are ascribed to them. So that's just an interesting, point. But one of the kind of correct observations in intelligent design is that we don't have codes without designers of codes. That's quite an important realization, right? In other words, you never have a code that appears by itself ever, right? It doesn't exist, right? And there's one gentleman who I've had a number of conversations with, maybe 10 conversations really just offline, who worked with, I think, Dennis Noble and Lynn Margulis's successor, who wrote, it's on my desk here someplace, but James Shapiro, Evolution of the 21st Century, Natural Genetic Engineering, and he's offering some $10 million prize. He's created this prize, for someone who can explain, essentially the human genome, the code, how that appeared without any intention of the code. And it's a very elemental question, but it's actually correct. It's not incorrect, right? In other words, and what that means and the implications of that is a very interesting question. But another code is language. And language is also a code, right? In many, many ways. You can't really understand linguistics without a code. My dear friend, who's a brilliant linguist who revived a Siberian language and is a fellow at the center, Dr. Elena Maslova. I want to credit her with that. She pointed that out to me. She said, oh, right, language is a code. I said, oh, good point, right? And it's her word of linguistics. So in language, in the original Hebrew, the word for thing, reified thing, and the word for word, logos, is the same word. D-A-V-A-R, davar. So, for example, the famous Ten Commandments, which at least we might have caught the movie, back in the day, are called the 10 aseret. The word's not commandments. It's aseret hadibrot. It's the 10 things, the 10 speech acts. And a thing is a speech act, right? It's a word. That's what the 10 speech acts, right? So it's the 10 logi, Now, stay with me for a second. I know this is it's a lot, but we'll get back to you. It's very beautiful. So there's the 10 logi, which is the Decalogue at Sinai. So it's the center of kind of the three kind of classical monotheistic faces, these 10 logi, these 10 words. But then you have this very strong tradition, Aramaic tradition, that appears all through texts of the Solomon lineage and Hebrew mysticism and all through Christian Kabbalah in the Renaissance, right? Which is the 10 logi, which incepted reality at the first nanoseconds, if you will. So what that means is that reality is coded with information. But information is the word. It's logos, right? It's value, right? And you can't actually split between what I call the holy trinity of information, value, and meaning. They're inter-included. Now, a human being is not simply a thing, a davar, but actually a thing is not actually a thing. Meaning an atom is not a thing. An atom is a set of conversations. right? So there's actually what I refer to as a conversational cosmos, right? And a conversational cosmos means there's conversations all the way down the evolutionary chain and all the way up the evolutionary chain. And we've actually added, Tom, to a new first principle and first value to our list. It's a momentous moment, right, of conversation. First principle and first value of conversation. So reality is a set of conversations, and the human being is a set of conversations, right? A human being is very beautiful. We're a set of conversations, and it's why conversations matter so much, right? In other words, like, I've thought it's such an urgent moment to change the source code of culture, and I'm one of those people who takes the meta crisis quite seriously. I think that's the only accurate and sane way to relate to the set of facts. And then I say to myself, well, why would I do podcasts? Those are just conversations. But actually, conversations matter enormously. And they matter not only in terms of their direct policy impact, right? A conversation is the configuration of reality. So as an erotic mystic, right? And again, when I say erotic mystic, it has nothing to do with sexuality, which is a different and important conversation, but not the one we're having now, right? There's 12 billion years of Eros before there's any sex, right? That means there's 12 billion years of conversations. And by the way, for 300 years in English, the word conversation meant sex and intercourse meant conversation. It's about 300 years, right? For, about 1400 till about 1800, where those words exchanged. So all sex was understood of being was a new form of conversation, right?
Yeah.
I would say the human being is, right, if you will, right, is you have a tissue? I think you need a tissue because you're not feeling so well today. You
No, no,
okay?
it's good.
This is my caretaker, Jewish
No, no, no,
chicken
no, no. I'm just
caretaker.
looking for water, but I don't see it right now. Ah, it is here.
Can you come and go?
Go
You
ahead,
gotta
please. Go
There
ahead.
you go. There we go. Okay, we got it. It's so the human being is. Let's define the human being. The human being is not a reified thing. The human being is a set of relationships, but that's too. It's too imprecise. The human being is a unique set of conversations. It's actually kind of stunning. It's like, oh, and then when you get that, you get another Hebraic word, again, part of the code, because language is a code, and the word is Messiah. So the word Messiah in the original Hebrew is actually Mashiach, which literally means, its root word, siach, conversation. So Messiah is the one who shows up in conversation, right? In the most, fundamental and important way. And so I'd say the human being to be a unique self is to be a unique, when we first formulated unique self, Ken and I formulated a very simple expression, true self, meaning you go from separate self to true self that we talked about. So we said true self plus perspective equals unique self. And that appears in the book. True self plus perspective equals unique self. In 2014, I reformulated it, right? And we formulated it as true self plus unique perspective plus unique quality of intimacy. Because perspective is right. Although they're ultimately the same, they're isomorphic, but they deserve differentiation. True self plus unique perspective plus unique quality of intimacy equals unique self. But then, as the years went on, you kind of realize, okay, so unique self is my unique quality of intimacy. It's my unique perspective. It's my unique configuration of desire. It's my unique set of allurements. Right? It begins to become much thicker. It's my unique will, actually. Right? Because my unique will actually emerges from all of the above. All of these form my unique will. My unique will acts in the world. And when I identify my unique will, and that's the essential topic of these 2 volumes, academic volumes, that I was privileged to write, Radical Kabbalah, right? The essential point was that the new human is the one who realizes their unique will. The entire book is about will, essentially. It's about unique will, right? Which is a whole other conversation we have to have. But really, what's called the Judah archetype, which is the archetype of the Solomon lineage of the realized human, or what we're calling today in cosmologic humanism, Homo Amor, or the new human and the new humanity, is not this hyper smart Ubermensch exactly, and it's not this brilliant kind of figure. It's the human being who's clarified their unique will, which is their unique deepest heart's desire, because desire is an act of will. And when it's unique will, it reaches for the future, because uniqueness is the organ of the future, right? And so that is homo amor, right? The one who's activated their unique will. And my unique will emerges from this unique set of conversations. So when I include someone in the depth of conversation, I change and they change, and reality changes. Right. Okay. So that's a longer response, but
Okay,
it's
so
just a
let
good inquiry. It's so
no,
important.
yes, no, it's great. So, but let me ask in another way. So, just
Please.
to locate it in a um, different field in the philosophy, but there's a term, there's a gestalt, a form that appears throughout philosophy. It's called the daemon, right? I
Right.
think you know
Right.
it.
Yeah.
And it's
Totally.
also like a form, like an idea, a conversation,
Intellect.
as you might
Yeah.
say, that also appears in religion and spirituality. So just to differentiate it, the diamond and the unique self, like where do you see overlaps? Where do you see? Because the interesting thing of the diamond is, of course, that it's an intermediary figure. It's
Right.
between you and God, right? And it enables you to speak to God, and it enables you to receive gifts or talents from God, which you might, call
Yeah.
unique will or something. So there
Yeah.
is,
Yeah.
but the thing of the diamond is that he's half in this world and he's half unknown. He's
Right.
half kind of occult and omitted. So it's like
Right.
it's a half known symbol,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
No. No.
And and it has to be
Yeah.
because he's right at the edge of the chaos always. So
Right. Right.
bringing new form. So where do you see?
Yeah. No.
Um,
No. Diamond's is such a beautiful figure, and and say a couple of things. And of course, our friend Layman likes figures like the diamond because he likes being at the edge of the chaos. And Layman, if you're listening, yes, we did say that, right? So, right, but but it's a beautiful and beautifully. He loves to be there in a beautiful way. So I'd say a couple of things. One, a short thing, well, a small thing. They're both short, but one small and one, I think, very significant. I hope. So first, just the short thing, but needs to be said, but it takes us in a different direction, so we won't follow that thread, which is the split between Hedon and Daemon, right? The Daemon is a false split, right? And that's very, very important. The Daemon
between
is
who?
between the Hedonic, Hedon,
Okay.
Hedon, right? And
Hmm.
the kind of classical, I don't know how you're pronouncing it. I'm probably pronouncing it wrong. Daemon or Daemon, or your
Hmm.
diamond, or whatever you pronounce, Daimon, right?
Hmm.
Right? Is a false split. In other words, the daemonic, right? The call of the intellect or purpose, right? And the hedonic and the call of pleasure are ultimately the same, right? So we need to kind of identify my highest pleasure is also my highest purpose. But let's bracket that for a second. I want to just kind of overcome that split that exists in kind of Greek thought. But now kind of approaching it more directly and how it relates to the unique self. So this is a good place to always invoke, not just Jung, but his student Hillman. So when
Sure.
you look at James Hillman's work, on a given day, and I was sorry I didn't get to talk to him before he passed. And of course, his student, Thomas More, popularized him, in a couple of books. I think Care of the Soul, like 25, 30 years ago. But when you read Hillman, Hillman is I loved him and he would infuriate me because on a given page, he's so incredibly uneven, right? Meaning he moves from saying something just so insightful, and so good to saying something, and James, I apologize for this next sentence, but something so unbearably stupid, right? And not thought through, and not careful and sloppy, right? And so, and the Daimon is one of the places where he did that, right? In other words, he would use terms and they could kind of mean anything, right? They could
Right.
kind of mean anything, he would move from a materialism to a kind of archetypal, world filled with kind of meaning, to a nihilism, and he'd move back and forth between them. And in a certain sense, you could get away with that before there was a meta crisis. You could get away with that in what I would call modernity. When people just assumed there was a common sense, sacred axioms of value, we were going to be okay, and now we're going to get deeper, and I don't know, in a United States context, you would say John F. Kennedy, 1960, can run against Richard Nixon. They can kill each other and still be good friends, which they were. They were quite good friends from the Senate all through the 50s. They were friends till Kennedy was killed, and it was a different world. It was a world that wasn't fundamentally polarized and hadn't really thought about existential risk despite the bomb. Rachel Carson was just writing Silent Spring, and so it was a world in which Hillman could get away with it, right? Today, and I've tried to share this actually with our friend Layman, right? If we're going to be shamanic and kind of invoke terms like Daemon, we have to actually also understand our larger responsibility to articulate a story of value that people can locate themselves in and have it actually mean something, not in a despotic way or dogmatic way where there's kind of freezed or fixed definitions, but there's a sense of what we mean, and that's why we've done first principle and first value equations. So unique self is an expression of first principle and first value, equations, which are about uniqueness, number one. Uniqueness is a core structure. I want to feel the difference. Uniqueness is a first principle and first value of cosmos that evolves through matter, right? The physiosphere, through life, the biosphere, gets to the noosphere, to the human being. Then we go through all these levels of human depth, self-reflection, until we finally crystallize in this quality of cosmos displaying its beauty as unique self. The Daemon could be that, and the Daemon absolutely could be that, or the Daemon could be a trickster, or the Daemon could be a shadow quality, or the Daemon could be purpose, or the Daemon could be so many things we're not quite sure what it is. But it is this quality in cosmos which is magical in the sense that it's calling the human being, if I can mix Greek terms and Neo-Darwinism, it says to the human being, Neo-Darwinism's not taking you home. Right? In other words, having your physical needs met, and your kind of social needs, the first, Maslow's hierarchy, you got it all covered, you still don't feel fulfilled, right? And going to Maslow's self-transcendence needs at his end of his life is not going to take you home. There's a daemon that's calling you to this magical story of your life that needs to be lived, and that's insanely important. The magical quality of daemon is brings to the unique self the magical quality, right? There's a soul print, which is the way I used to talk about it. Hillman, of course, in his one book that there's kind of like singers that have like one song that makes it on the radio, like, Harry Chapin, had one song made it on the radio, which was Cats in the Cradle, and he would do concert notes. I have one song that made it on the radio, Cats in the Cradle. So Hillman's book that kind of made it on the radio was The Soul's Code, right? Which he talks about the Daemon. That's but he kind of hides his position there. If you read Hillman's larger corpus, which I'm enough of a nerd to have done quite a bit of, right? So he's much more ambiguous about the Daemon, and he goes in many more different directions. But I'd say the Daemon is important because it's magical, right? In other words, I'm not happy with my life if my life is not magical. I just actually did a podcast, which I think it appeared today or something like that, with Aubrey Marcus on magic, right?
Right.
And the Daemon is magic, right? The Daemon is.
Yeah, well, I mean, in the philosophy, it's a little bit different because you have this Daemon appearing in Platon, and you have it in Schopenhauer, and this is there is a notion there, and the question: so where does talent come from, and what purpose does it serve, right? And character, and all these kind of things, and value, as you would say. And so, like, there's this thing where you could ask yourself, where does this uniqueness of the will come from? And because you can't really differentiate between unique will and talent and the ways to shape the future. Basically, these all kind of overlay each other. It's like, at least in these older texts, and I think Hillman is more like eclectic
So
in a sense.
Hillman is more eclectic, and even, and Plato himself is, which Plato are we talking to? Are we talking to the Plato of the seventh epistle, right? Are we talking to the Plato who kind of hates artists, right? So it's Plato's complex,
No.
and Schopenhauer's your world, but I found Schopenhauer also to be Schopenhauer is one of the places that I bow, right? I mean, just he was just this massive, profound figure. But again, if I can, I think there's a confusion between daemon, for example, and talent, right? Which exists in many, many texts, right? In other words, we tend to identify daemon with talent and also with kind of, flamboyant talent, to use Howard Bloom's phrase, flamboyant, flagrant talent. But actually, unique self, if I'm a mother in Mumbai, let me just get it, and I have 3 kids, and my husband's left me, right? And I've stood for the integrity of the feminine, which is why he left. And, and I'm barely making a living. And I'm now struggling to have my 3rd kid have pants that go down long enough so they won't be made fun of when they go to school. And I'm holding that family unit together, with everything I fucking have, right? In this heroic way. I can be doing that functionally effectively, or I can be doing that in my unique self, right? In other words, this woman, she's doing this, and this is her full unique self, and it's invisible, it's private, it's not what we usually associate with talent, but it is her unique will, right? It is her unique, if you will, vocation, right? It's not celebrated, right? In any way, right? But it's this experience that this is my unique moment. This is the unique juncture of my life, right? This is where my unique will pours through. That's witnessed by all of cosmos. Right? This is I am reality's uniqueness. I am God in this moment. In this moment, in this house, right? In this, temporal moment in which eternity resides, this 36-year-old Mumbai woman, is goddess, right? Unwitnessed, uncelebrated, right? Unsung, and yet utter, stunning, resplendent, unique self. And when she plays her unique self and plays her instrument, she literally, cosmically, has unimaginable power, literal power, and her uniqueness literally pours in. It's a unique current of Eros that pours in to all worlds above and below and actually strengthens all of reality, right? Kind of vivifies all of reality. That's unique self, right? And in the discussions of Daemon, that again, Hillman is, you're correct, more eclectic. Obviously, Schopenhauer and Plato are different worlds, but there's always this association with talent, right? And of course, you could say that this woman has talent, but generally, talent is understood in a more flagrant and flamboyant way. Hillman always talks about it in that kind of way, in this kind of, but it's far more subtle. It's far more often private, right? It's far more heroic, right? It's not right. It's a much more rarefied and subtle and fine wine, right, than the way Daemon is usually used. But yes, and having said that, Daemon is part of the unique self literature, absolutely. So it's a yes with kind of, without wanting to collapse literatures, but definitely that is a current in world history and in world philosophy which flows into unique self. That unique self needs to integrate, clarify, right, and evolve.
No, I
Like,
mean we're always like in a term of we're never outside of tradition, like
right?
wherever we come from, and so what are for you, if when you talk about unique will, so what would be the characteristics that you see,
Well, it's funny, right?
like in terms of in contrast to me wanting to pay my bills, let's say,
Right, right. No, no,
right?
I get it. Right, right.
So
And by the way, just to say, paying my bills. Right. Let me say it a little differently. The anxiety that people have around paying bills is one of the core sources of human shame. Shame is always a shame of powerlessness. right? And I have a couple of friends over the years who've had trouble paying bills, right? I myself in 2006 knew something of unexpected events that caused, right, potential financial collapse, right? And the experience of shame or of being humiliated in trying to get my basic needs met, which is the experience of most of humanity, is not one I would write off easily, right? Meaning there is a will, which is a will to dignity. It's a will to dignity, right? And the ability to create the dignity of my life, right, is a very big deal, right? Having said that, let's see if we can expand it for a second. So the word will in Hebrew is a two-letter root, right? And this is a great. I mean, and again, you wrote an important book on will, and but we're now in your bailiwick, and it's an insanely important because unique self is unique will, so it intersects with your work, critically, and actually, as people buy the Unique Self book and buy your work and reading them together is actually a great idea. But let's just go back to the word will. So the word will, right, appears in the Song of Solomon in the first chapter, verses, 3 and 4, where the lover says to the beloved, Mashcheni acharecha, draw me after you. So it's not that there's this aggressive kind of predatory masculine. No, the beloved, right, in this case the feminine, says to the lover, draw me after you, seduce me, holy seduction. Then, kind of semicolon, if you will, although it's not punctuated, right, v'narutza, roots, which is ratzon, will, and I will run after you. So the word run after you, narutza, is ratzon, will. So will is described there as this moment where, and people listening, if you have, either because you have direct experience or because you've read some, kind of literary description, but there are stages in the central, and there's one stage where everyone who's ever been in the central knows where you're past the point of decision making. You're not in or out, you're in, right? I'll bet you're in. You've crossed that line. So the place where you cross that line, that force of Eros that arouses in you after you've crossed the line, that's will. That's what's described by the Solomon lineage as will. So in kind of Western thought, you would say, well, that's an abandonment of will. You've just abandoned your will. What do you mean? You just left your will behind. No. You left behind your lower will, and you just accessed, if you're in the right place with the right person at the right time, I'm taking that as a given for the sake of this conversation, right context, right person, right time, total mutuality, total sacredness, right? So, but you're at the place where your clarified will, which is your will towards wholeness. It's your will towards value, but value in the sense of Eros value, in the sense of value as valentius, right? This love, this Eros. So now you have the Eros of cosmos moving through you, discreetly expressed as your individuated will, moving you towards a larger wholeness. Right? That's unique will. Right? That's the quality of unique will. So will is an erotic word at its core. And again, 12 billion years of Eros before any sex. Right? So Eros means the quality of unique will that moves reality towards ever deeper intimacies. So reality's progressive deepening of intimacies and the evolution of intimacy within my own life, right? To include more of myself, to get to more and more wholeness, right? I want to sit with our friend Dick Schwartz and do my internal family systems work so I can include more and more split off parts into myself, is this will towards erotic wholeness. So my unique will towards my unique erotic wholeness is my unique self, and that's Ratzon. Right? So it's suffused, it's pulsing, it's tumescent with Eros, and you can't split between will and Eros. So will is very much an erotic word in the most beautiful sense of things, and the human being is, of course, a set of erotic conversations. And by erotic conversations, we mean, again, the conversations that are pregnant with meaning and goodness. I mean, I'd say the most erotic conversation I ever had, Tom, that I can, a sustained set of conversations, right, was with this woman who we our apartments were adjacent to each other. When I met her, she must have been 80. I mean, at least Maury. She was Orthodox Jewish, so I was never able ever to shake her hand or hug her. I mean, there was always she had a line of distance around her, but her children, had abandoned her for whatever set of reasons. She was a Moroccan Jewish woman in a kind of Moroccan neighborhood near a university where I was writing an early version of a thesis, and every Friday night, the two of us would make the Sabbath Kiddush together. And we'd have these short conversations, but every word she said, I mean, her face had this stunningly beautiful face. It was just shine. Her face shined. It was like radiance. And every word she said was just, I can hear her talking right now, was just like, there was no wasted breath. There was no wasted word. There was no split between meaning and sound, right? It was pure erotic conversation, short, 10 to 15 minutes, no wasted words, always kind of penetrating to essence about anything. And you're like, who is this person, right? And she was, by all standards of life, an ordinary person without obvious talent, right? Right? And yet the will of Cosmos, she was so uniquely Maury, was her name. So uniquely Maury. And so that I can literally, I mean, you and I have had many conversations that we can't call up right now. I can call up, her face, her voice. I was, maybe in my late 20s when the conversations happened. So that's something of this unique will that infuses a conversation.
What do you make of the will to power in this context? And I know it sounds utterly banal.
Power?
Right? The will to power. And I know it sounds
Yeah.
banal, but I think it might be still interesting because, I mean, at least the sentiment was that we're all, subjected to this will to strive for dominance and to get to the top of our respective hierarchies or whatever. And so, so where how do you square that? Like when you think
That's
about
great.
that, like,
That's great. No, that's great. So I just want to say, I'm going to say it in a couple of ways. So first, human beings have an obligation to be power hungry. We should have a will to power, but power doesn't mean surface dominance, right? I once had a set of conversations with Ted Turner's, kind of wife companion after Jane Fonda was describing to me Ted.
yes.
Right? Yeah, and I just for propriety's sake, I won't say the name of the person, but then I got a little interested in Ted, and so I was wherever I was, it was late at night, and I had his biography with me, and Ted used to arrange his time so he would never have more than 2 minutes alone. So the job of his assistant was to arrange his time because the idea of being alone without scheduled something was terrifying to him. Was he powerful? Right? Right? I don't know. Right? I don't know. I was sharing with my dear friend Aubrey and Vailana and Caitlin and her fiance Godzi. And we were talking about about a year ago. We were in Manhattan and we were studying together, and we were talking about the what I call the sixth level, a sixth quality of pleasure, which is the highest one in this dharma, which we won't go into now. That tried to articulate over the years that we're trying to bring together now. And the highest level is the pleasure of power. But the pleasure of power, and there's a kind of a reticence to a pleasure of power. But here's the thing, right? If you have, a gypsy family and a Jewish family, being taken to a gas chamber in 1944 at Auschwitz, right? And there's 3 Nazi guards that are kind of, walking in them there, right? These young men completely ripped apart. And how do they find themselves there? And the worst part of their selves have now emerged in this kind of horror. So now in this scene, who's powerful, right? So it's not the Nazi guards, right? It's right. Those are not the powerful people in that scene, although they're going to be alive in 20 minutes from now, and the Gypsy family and the Jewish family won't be. But in the wider frame of reality, right, the ability to walk that route and to walk with dignity and to hold your child and hold your child close as you, right, who's powerful? So power expresses itself in many distressing disguises, right? But power means that I'm in the center of myself. I know who I am and I act from that center, right? That's what power means, right? And so we have an obligation to be power hungry, right? And to impact reality. Now, in this particular scenario, in this particular like snapshot of reality, their only way to impact reality was their dignity and their kindness in these last moments. But that's not the only way to impact reality. We also should try and impact reality in the manifest world, not only by going inwards, but by launching a rebellion in Warsaw, right? In 1943, right? And by, as I was with the Dalai Lama at some point in Dharamsala, and we were in kind of the back room chatting, and he said to me, he said, people say to me, Dalai Lama, pacifist, pacifism, silly, stupid, right? In other words, pacifism is actually not a possibility in this world. I haven't, at this moment in time, that's actually not a possibility. It goes back to our conversation about war. War is a tragic structure in its very essence. And in order to impact and create the most kind world for the most generations, for the most people, in the most time, we sometimes have to engage in power in its most brutal forms, holding this wider field, right? So there's a unique self, there's a unique quality in time. In Radical Kabbalah, we have a first section on the unique self of time, the unique quality of time. And so all of that is to say, right, that we should have a will to power, right? We have an obligation to be powerful, right? Power is a quality of divinity. We are correctly shamed in our powerlessness, and yet our power is, right, this not surface power. Our power is depth power. When we don't have depth power, then we go to become Sauron, right? In some version or the other, Scott Peck called it the people of the lie, right? In his probably best book, much better than his famous one, The Road Less Traveled, the people of the lie, which is the ordinary people who act out of malice, right, to achieve surface views of power because of an unbearable interior emptiness, right? So yes, we should be power hungry. Yes, we should have a massive will to power. Yes, we should want to impact in the world, right? And my unique self is to exercise my unique power in the world, not only in the dignity of myself, but to impact my environment in every possible way that I can. I should be powerful. There's a shame in inappropriate powerlessness, and there's the great power of surrender when there's nothing else I can do. Something
Wonderful.
like that.
So one last question,
Please,
and maybe there's a chance to bring all of this together. So
please.
all these different topics that seem kind of disparate. So when I'm doing podcasts with different people, I always notice that everybody has like a center of gravity of interest, let's call it, right? And I noticed that by myself. I don't know why I periodically come back to the topic of will. And it's not, I'm not doing this on purpose. It's just, I got inspirations and suddenly I fall back into this kind of gravitational vortex. And it's like, okay, so is it me? Is it my past? Or artists describe themselves as being a vessel for something else. They got ideas. Am I part of a certain field that, wants to, ruminate about will, think about will, and bring it in the world. It's just like it's an ongoing field, and I noticed that people have different gravitational fields of interest. Mm-hmm. And then you could ask, of course, so where does it come from? Is it the Daemon or is it the unique self or whatever? It doesn't really matter. So the interesting thing is for you, and maybe there's a very, very personal question, is the topic of the unique self something that is a kind of gravitational center? And if so, like, what is the, because I always find this interesting, what is the wildest thought that you ever had that is not yet maybe fully formed, right? Which is not yet fully formed, but you have an intuition where you might go, and where you in 5 years' time might have a fully conceptualized idea of, I have even reached greater depth
Yeah, beautiful.
in my falling into this vortex. Do you feel where I
Yeah,
want
yeah,
to
no,
go
it's
with this
great. It's a
question?
great inquiry, Tom. It's always great. It's always great to talk to you. That was a compliment. So I'll say it briefly, right? It's in terms of that wild thought. Well, we might not get to it now, but I'll say very briefly, if I could say it in like one sentence, it's all personal. When someone tells you it's not personal, they're lying. It's all personal, right? The whole field is personal, right? This notion of this impersonal field of, true self, or this notion of a kind of impersonal science, right? Kind of these kind of fields that are utterly impersonal, that are easily reducible to the mechanical. Right? None of it's true, right? It's all, the entire fucking thing, all the way up and all the way down, is personal. And one of the reasons the unique self is so important to me is because, and the personal is not personality, right? And as the separate self gets lost in my personality and this, and the true self is impersonal, and science is kind of this, experiences itself as this field of impersonal laws. And obviously there are laws in cosmos that violate personhood, right? So, in Tolkien, or in, let's take a different, cultural matrix, more recent and less epic, but well known. Let's say Avatar. Can we get the trees to join the battle? And I remember, when I was in Europe, and I did a tour of just some of the brutal places, and I was driving, particularly, I was leaving Krakow. I think it was Krakow, and driving to Auschwitz, and I'm like, I was angry at the trees. Like, why did you guys just stand by? Right? You have so many poems written for you, right? And that's, why did you stand by? Why did you stand by as witness? Why did you not rise up? Right? So clearly there's a part of the world that is restrained. It's the mystery of kenosis, is that in the world doesn't immediately respond to torture. The countryside of Thailand didn't rise up in protest against the Khmer Rouge and Pol Pot, right? As it should have, or China's Red Guard, et cetera, in 1966 or 7. So obviously I understand that there's a field which constrains itself. But having said that, reality at its very core is personal. And it's more personal than we think. And there's a personhood all the way up and all the way down the evolutionary chain. Now, again, that doesn't mean a retrojective animism, in which I think that a rock, right, is Tom. I'm not confused. I'm really excited to do a podcast with Tom, not really excited to do a podcast with a rock, right? I'm allured to the world of interactive human relationships. I'm not allured to date a rock or a proton. So obviously there's continuity and discontinuity, but having said all those disclaimers, it's all alive. It's all personal. It's all uniquely personal, and every single life matters enormously. And that's not true about just every human life, but I'm going to focus on human life now just for a second. Right? Clearly we need to atone for our relationship to the animal world and change it dramatically. It's one of the great horrors of the century. But for now, I'm just going to talk for a second, and I'll close with this on my side, which is just the notion that every human life matters enormously, that the whole thing is personal, that no one's outside of the circle, that no one's expendable, and that every flutter of experience in my body, every flutter of ecstasy and every flutter of humiliation, right, and every flutter of opening and every flutter of longing and yearning, right, which is every flutter of will, right, matters enormously. right? Right. There is no split between matter and what matters. The whole thing's personal, right? And so unique self is simply uniqueness is the first principle and first value of uniqueness, and the first principle and first value of personhood are very tightly related, right? Although not isomorphic, right? So so Freeman Dyson, the physicist correctly talks, or Stuart Kauffman in one of his more unreadable articles, talks about some version of first person all the way down, right? Some version of, right? But it's all personal. When we get that it's all personal and that it all matters, right? Then the world changes. The new human knows that it's all personal and that it all just matters enormously, and that the person has unimaginable power, right, to affect all worlds through the precision and the will, and which creates the poignant imprint of my personhood, something like that.
Fantastic.
Yay!
Marc, thank you so much
Crazy
for your
delight.
time.
Yay! Thank you for the book. I'm so excited we have the book.
Yeah, I'm so excited too. We have the book now in Germany, Unique Self, dein einzigartige Selbst. Yes, fantastic. Thank you, Marc.
Delight. Thank you, man.